Welcome to Envision More. Here, we dig deep into the insights of first-generation wealth builders, unearthing stories of passion, resilience, and relentless vision. Your host is Wayne Wagner Jr., founder of Visionary Wealth Management. So sit back and dig in. It's time to envision more.
Welcome to another episode of Envision More. And today we've got the longtime co-host Trent Booth, president of Visionary. I do that all the time, Trent. Veritas Leadership Group.
I did so well as coach. I got his job. It's we got to keep this. We can't edit this out. It's a thing. President of Visionary.
There you go. President of Visionary, something or other, not Visionary Wealth Management.
Come on.
Veritas
Visionary
Leadership
Division.
So you can be president of Visionary Equipment Leasing. How about that? It's on the wall behind me somewhere.
I'll take it.
So, and then I'm blessed today. We're blessed today to be joined by my brother, Nathan Wagner. And Nathan is he is really well known in his corner of the world. He gets called on into some crazy complex situations, typically when things are burning down in somebody's life. But Nathan is the pastor at Sparta. It used to be Sparta Baptist Church. There's Sparta Center Church.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so
made that change recently.
There you go. Pastor at Sparta Center Church in Sparta, Michigan, which is right outside Grand Rapids. So it's kind of on the left side of the hand palm there if you're a Michigonian. And then Nate also works with Cornerstone University in a capacity overseeing student counseling and mentoring graduate students in the counseling program. He runs a personal counseling ministry, and then he has a ministry that he does he's starting up called the Actuator Group, or the Actuator Leadership Group, which is really a ministry aimed at serving people in ministry, or people who are in leadership roles in ministry, looking at strengthening them, helping them develop grit, resilience, and giving them wings to be able to stay in ministry and on task and effective in ministry for longer and longer. That's a field that there's a lot of burnout. There's a lot of people that crash and flame out, are only there for a season. And Nate has a real knack for helping people develop the skills that they need to stay in that field and effective in that field with the intestinal fortitude and spiritual fortitude to do that. So Nathan, thank you. Long-winded intro there, but the resume is long, and for like 4 different jobs right now. So,
sure.
And hopefully by the time this airs, it's probably going to be aiming towards shaving that down to maybe 2.5 to 3 jobs in the title at some point here. So thank you for being here, Nate.
Privileged to be here. Excited for this conversation.
Cool.
Nate, if you were to give us a speed run of like how we got here, give us the origin story for Nathan Wagner.
Yeah, man. I grew up in New Jersey with Wayne as the older brother, and a couple younger siblings, and
terrible older brother.
Now, always aspiring to greater things, and appreciated the competitive side of that with him and I all the way through. Came out to Michigan to go to Cornerstone University. Thought it was going to be to go into aeronautical engineering. And through the process of just a number of different complicating factors, ended up getting a degree from Cornerstone that was more in the area of psychology, with some educational elements to that. Got into youth ministry in an interim capacity and stepped into that full time, served as a youth and family pastor for 14 years in a local church up here in Sparta, Michigan. Along the way, got married to a college sweetheart, had 3 kids that are now all adults. One of them is married and enjoying this season of life with them and coaching them as they're launching into what's next for them. And so I've been transitioned into the senior pastor role in 2011, been serving as the senior pastor at Sparta Center Church for the last 13 years. And now looking at a transition from that into more in the area of coaching and counseling full time for the purpose of really trying to affect the leadership crisis that is present in the nation, and specifically regionally, but ultimately nationally and internationally, looking at the leadership crisis, looking at the ultimately the spiritual leadership crisis that we see, and wanting to help keep leaders in the game and help them overcome the inevitable complexities that oftentimes take them out of the game, and or compromise their effectiveness in it. So excited about that, and excited about the opportunities and really the favor that I've been given in those spaces, to be able to enjoy stepping into a number of different difficult transitions and brokenness and pain, and seeing some really restorative things happen, and seeing leaders be able to springboard into even greater things, and excited to be able to do that in a greater capacity over the next 20 years.
So you said 14 years as youth pastor. Did I hear that right?
Yes, sir.
That's
Yes, sir.
fun. So that's where you cut your teeth. That's the
Yes,
first like
sir.
job after college as youth pastor, and then to become
Absolutely.
the senior pastor. That's not natural
Sure.
necessarily,
Sure.
right?
Yeah,
So
no doubt.
14 years, it must be some highlights, some fun moments you can celebrate here in terms of young Nathan Wagner finding his way as a leader
Uh,
and figuring it
yeah,
out.
no doubt. The one of the greatest privileges is that this church that I've had the chance to be a pastor at for 27 years saw me grow up, right? So they got to see all of the crazy, just silly stuff, whether it be having chaotic situations that are the kids are running roughshod all over the building, to things getting broken that need to be dealt with as a result of that, going on mission trips and having any number of different complications, whether it be vans breaking down, or kids ended up being hospitalized, or just a variety of things, making silly mistakes where you're allowing them to get exposed to media that's not always the most helpful, and having to kind of
Mm.
rein that back in, or apologize profusely because it was something that happened on your watch. Those are
You let the
all.
kids interview with the local news?
Yeah, no, well, there's some of that where the news gets called in when some crazy stuff happens. Had some police show up a number of times because there were some drug transactions happening, or guns being brought into the building, where I had to non-violently disarm some individuals. Just some really hard stuff, and really trying to convince parents that I still knew what I was doing and I was the right guy to continue down that path, right? So a number of different things you got to talk yourself out of. But that those years as a youth pastor were some of the most powerfully forming years of my life, seeing the role that leadership development could play. Having a chance to work with my high schoolers and seeing them become leaders in that ministry, and then ultimately leaders in the church, and then ultimately leaders in the community and the marketplace. And now actually have hired on one of them who works closely with
Mm.
me as my assistant director at Cornerstone, who was in seventh grade when I came in as a youth pastor. And so she's been an incredible leader in that context in her own right, and now serving alongside of me. And so just grateful for seeing the power that leadership development and training can play in formation, and then ultimately multiplication. And so those years as youth pastor, I wouldn't trade for anything. Some of the hardest years of my life, trying to raise young kids, trying to navigate the early years of marriage while trying to figure that all out. Wouldn't want to go back, but certainly wouldn't want to trade them either.
Mm.
Nate, you said something there, the leadership crisis. And I thought maybe before we step into that in terms of spiritual leadership crisis, let's talk about that in the macro. And that's probably a softball pitch to both you and Trent. Where do you see because there's never been more leadership content out there, right? There's never been more books written, more podcasts, nor more webinars, more content that we can ingest on leadership. And yet we seem to be falling behind, where courageous leadership, visionary leadership, leadership that's confident and competent seems to be lacking more and more. Where do you think, like, how did we get here as a society, as a country?
I think so. I'll start on the where we are, and I'll back up. So I think leadership has greater complexity and probably more paradoxes now than it's ever had before. Meaning that there's expectations on leaders, but there's also a heightened sense of suspicion around leaders. Right? What's normalized is that leadership should be challenged, that you should be suspicious of anyone who steps into a leadership role, and yet the expectations that are on those leaders is that they need to lead out confidently, but they also need to be humble, and they need to be accessible, and they need to not assume that they have more information, or are more capable than they actually are. So I think the complexities are more significant. I think if you go back over the last couple of decades, you've seen it at a national level, at a political level, where not just the normal corruptive elements that we see with politicians and others, but also just whether it be in the spiritual side of it or in the political side of it, just personality of leaders that are now in a widespread way. There's just a lack of trust, right? There's a lack of confidence that that person is in this for me, that this person has my best interest, that they're not just in it for themselves. And whether that's always been the case or that's just something that's maybe a little bit more overt, there's a greater suspicion, there's a greater hesitation to trust leaders, and then leaders that are doing it for the best interest of those they're caring for, that are within their sphere. They have a harder hill to climb because of that suspicion and because of the way so many have presented leadership in such a negative, destructive way. But you're right, the content is out there, the opportunities to be able to grow in your leadership and learn how to take on what Tim Elmore calls the humility confidence paradox, right? Where you're able to be humble and accessible and teachable and yet confident in what you're capable of doing, and step into spaces where you can offer something and have confidence that you can add value into the spaces that you're called to lead into. So Trent, I'd love to hear your take on that same question, sir.
I hear the word suspicion a lot when we talk about leadership today. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that is earned.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said.
Right. So I would use the word scrutiny. And there's more scrutiny than ever, which is good and bad. Right. So the good and bad. I believe that in this season, leaders that are leading well under scrutiny, hopefully will show up even better.
Absolutely.
I think that we should be celebrating those. I would even say this. If we have this conversation 10 years ago, it's around a coffee table and stays there, and nobody else gets to hear it. So I love that with technology today and how easy it is now for us to produce a podcast, we can be in 3 different states and have this conversation right now, and be able to publish it, be able to produce this so that people could benefit from it. In other words, today in 2024, people can hear what's awesome about a great leader like Nate Wagner, where otherwise they might not ever hear what's going on in a corner of Michigan. For the rest of the world could have access to this in an hour, which is crazy, on their phone even. Okay. Sure. You go back 20 years, that's not a thing. So all to say, there's a book called The Death of Expertise. And one of the awesome and terrifying parts of everybody having a platform where we can all produce is it's harder to perhaps find those voices that have reason. So I think it's wildly appropriate. I would actually even teach kids to bring scrutiny and suspicion to the table. Just because they've got that title doesn't mean they've earned it, number one. Number two, hey, you find a great leader, protect them.
Yeah.
Because they're taking some friendly fire. They're probably taking some arrows. They're probably taking some shots that are not necessarily deserved. They've earned trust, and they're not being treated with trust appropriately. But part of that challenge is that, like, just because some kid's got a microphone and they look pretty and they're on TikTok, this kid that shouldn't necessarily have 20,000 followers or 5 million or, I don't know, 20 million followers on Twitter, for example. So anything I say, if I've got 20 million followers, because I'm on Twitter and I say it, that now is influence. And that's a tricky thing today. Influence is nuanced today, perhaps the way that we've never experienced anything like that. So, Wayne and I talk about, even on this podcast, I say something one time to his son and he hears it. He's like, oh, Trent said, Wayne's been saying that for years. I say it once. He's like, yeah. Sure. And by the way, the reverse is true. The inverse with my son hearing this from Wayne Wagner is like, oh, it's from Wayne. What I'm driving at is, as soon as somebody has 20 million followers on any platform, we probably elevate them beyond perhaps where they are necessarily wired. If that person has 20 million followers and they say that milk is bad, milk sales will take a hit, friends. If somebody has that many followers and says this person's awesome, that person immediately jumps up in their cloud. So it's tricky. There's never been more leaders vying for attention, and that return on attention is harder and harder to get. That said, is when you do find a pocket, let's go deep and hard. For example, I didn't know about Michael Hyatt until this past year, and I'm so excited to have found this. And lo and behold, there's just a great vein of gold that I can go in and go deep on Michael Hyatt. Whereas, 20 years ago, I only knew about John Maxwell. And here is this excellent leader just kind of waiting for us to discover. So There's a lot more to that discussion here that would probably go beyond this podcast, but I think that if I come back to scrutiny, is probably good. Let's filter who we're listening to, and when we find somebody great, boy, let's go deep.
Well, I think there's two reflections on that for me. One is, I think one of the things that leaders do is that they overvalue importance and they underestimate influence, because they want to be more important than they actually are or they ever will be, but they have more influence than they realize. And they don't necessarily harness that influence as well as they should. The second, though, is to your point, high quality, high character, integrity leaders. It's easier to differentiate yourself now, because of the clutter, right? Because of what's out there as influencers. It's easier for high caliber, high quality leaders to differentiate themselves in the marketplace. And I think that's where the opportunity to really have impact shows up, because of that ability to climb out of the clutter and actually identify, no, this is a leader that's worth following. And this is a leader that actually has something to say.
So specifically, if we think back to youth pastor for 14 years, you're speaking into young adults' lives, teenagers. I'm willing to bet, Nate, that you were the best leader that some of those kids had ever met. And this may not have occurred to you in real time, right?
Sure.
But upon reflection, some of them have come back to you and said, Pastor Nathan, you were the reason I got through. You didn't even know. Sure. You just said, hey, how you doing? And you meant it. And the kid maybe needed a hug or maybe just needed to be heard. Sure. And you showed up and spanned the gap there. I would argue that those in the quiet, the quiet corners and doing good work, it's not just influence, it's actually making a significant difference, not for clout, but because altruistic reasons.
Yeah. And the privilege of stepping into those spaces. And like you said, you're not always aware of it at the time. A lot of that only comes from looking back on that and seeing the journey that so many people have taken. But we know that when there's trauma, we know that one of the best things that can help to mitigate trauma is a trusted adult who believes in that individual. And when that person steps in and offers that, it starts to mitigate some of the long-term effects of the trauma. And I know, looking back, that I've had the privilege to play that role in the number of individuals' lives. And it's something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life.
That's good. Good stuff. Let me ask you a question, and this is an overlay, and it's on the same topic, but so as our society and our economy has gotten more and more specialized, we have less and less opportunity to have people who see the bigger picture. And to me, that leads to a lack of leadership, because and it also, I think, raises the scrutiny. So when I don't understand something, I automatically doubt it. I automatically question it. I automatically question the motives of the person making the decisions, those kinds of things. And so as we have gotten more and more specialized within our job descriptions, within our careers, those kinds of things, I think we become more narrowly focused, and we lack the broad view. And so when someone is at the top taking the broad view, there can be a natural distrust, and it's not even reflective of the truth of that person. That person may be actually knowledgeable, they may be an amazing leader, but the scrutiny or the suspicion comes out of a lack of understanding by the followers, essentially.
Sure.
Do you see a correlation there? And if so, how can we help that in the spheres that we impact and the spheres that we interact with?
So I'm going to respond to it, I think, on the leader side, and then I'll go to the other side for a second. I think part of what leaders have to grapple with is that they are forced to negotiate a non-mutuality gap every day in everything that they do. And what I mean by that is that there's a gap between their expectations and reality. There's a gap between the real and the ideal, but there's also a gap between what they deserve, the affirmation, the appreciation, the validation, the vindication that they deserve, and what they're going to receive. And I think, to your point, there is scrutiny on that individual. And I think if we don't understand that leadership by definition is a willingness to step into non-mutual relationships where you're never going to get the validation, vindication, appreciation that you deserve, because people can't fully understand the magnitude of the role and the rationale behind the decisions that you're making. And if you don't surrender the right to get those things in response, and you don't release people of the responsibility to give it to you, you will be working from a deficit and ultimately working in a codependent dynamic rather than a willingness to take on the responsibility that leadership calls for, and that is that non-mutuality gap. And to navigate that space, I think you've got to surrender the right and release people of the responsibility to give it to you. I think the other side then is for those that are wanting to look for leaders to follow, there's got to be a willingness to actually vet the process and not just allow for the well to be poisoned or some other kind of remark or inference to simply carry the day when it comes to the people that I'm going to trust in my sphere, the people that are going to have influence. Because if people decide, I've said this for years, if people decided 10 years ago that I was no longer qualified to be the pastor at this church, it would have taken about 2 days for a list of about 25 things to be put on paper to say, this is why Nate's no longer qualified. Not necessarily because I've got major, character flaws or other kinds of things, but just because there's a number of things that I've messed up on. There's a lack of wisdom. There's a lack of things that I've proficiency that I've showcased, that if the decision is made that this person's no longer qualified to be the leader, it only takes a little bit of time to come up with anecdotes that can be put together to make that case. And so I think there's a willingness to say, hey, we got to give grace. We've got to give ground. And I've benefited from that grace and really from that latitude that has been afforded to me while people watched me grow and make the poor decisions and lack the wisdom to be able to get to the place where now I have something to offer and that I can add value in those spaces.
Yeah, I think at its root, every great leader mimics that insurance company commercial, right? We know a lot because we've seen a lot.
Yeah.
And so I think the every great leader really has a past of and has a catalog of their mistakes or could have done betters.
Absolutely.
And it is more challenging today in terms of leadership because something can be done, it can be captured on camera, it can be put on the internet, and it lives forever. And it can be the death of a career. It can be the death, and it's 1 week moment, and it just accelerates and magnifies our own human tendencies, which, right. I will judge you by your actions. I'll judge myself by my intentions.
Yep. Absolutely.
Right? So, but to your point, Nate, you have to, if you're going to step into leadership in any role, we have to accept a willingness to have people not happy with us.
Yeah.
Right. And nowhere that's nowhere more present than, let's say, in a presidential election, right?
Yeah.
Where somewhere between 47% and 52% or 53% of the people in this country are going to be angry at you no matter what you say on any given day.
Yeah.
And we're so polarized. And that's, you both, we both mourn the choice of candidates and the quality of the people that then rise to say, yep, I'm up for that. And we say, why? And then we bemoan the fact that we don't have better people, because the better people are going, I don't need to live.
Nobody wants that job. That's the
Right.
reality. So if you say, why is there such a deficiency there? The best leaders, the best and brightest are not stampeding towards politics. And I think even here in the States, and again, I'm an immigrant, so let me speak to what I'm observing, right? Having been here for only 20 years, but when you go back to Nixon and that, we're still feeling echoes of we used to be able to trust the nobility of the politicians, right?
Yeah.
Now, noble politician, oxymoron, like a full-length bikini, or go down the road. That is not just in politics, though. All right, because there's you go to the Catholic Church, there's a crisis in priests, the priesthood, right, dying. They've got buildings and they don't have enough priests to be able to cover all those buildings. Well, there's more than one reason for that one, which again, outside the scope of our podcast here. But even if we talk about pastors, again, even in sort of more of our evangelical type circles, best and brightest aren't going to seminary, and even, our boys, Wayne, I've asked the question several times, like, hey, any interest? And by the way, not even on their radar, guys raised in the church, gone to private Christian schools, not even kind of kicking around the idea of even going necessarily to Christian college. So when we think about like what's going on there and more, how do we get here? I would say, like, okay, what is the answer then? How could we get more excellent leaders and public as public teachers? How can we
Sure.
get more excellent leaders to be youth pastors? How can we get more excellent teachers to be curious, interested about stepping into
Sure.
leadership development? Any thoughts there, Nate? Because you've seen a lot of things
Yeah.
and you're still working with kids,
Yeah. So
college students.
I'll work from the negative and then I'll go to the positive. So I would say the negative is the horror stories are more prevalent than the wins and the victories, right?
They're
So,
always there. We're seeing
um,
more of them, I would argue.
yeah, and
Right?
so like my own kids, I would say have shied away from the idea of any kind of vocational ministry, at least in the local church, just because they see the toll that it's taken on me. The
Dad
toll
took
it's taken
blows.
on our
Yep,
marriage, on our
sure.
family, and so, and that's not because I serve in a toxic environment. It's just because it's the nature of ministry and the impact that it has. The other thing is though that I think people can only aspire to the vision that they're given, meaning that if they don't
Mm.
have a vision for something that goes beyond get a good job or just take on whatever is easily accessible, like there's a vision for why this matters and the impact that this can have. And if that vision is not being laid out, and then support and encouragement is being given towards that, and mentorship is being laid out, where a preferred future is being put in front of somebody, and then the steps that need to be taken and the resources required to help them get there, if that's not being put in front of somebody, they're going to simply aspire to what's accessible and what seems to be the most natural course for them to take. And so I think we've got to do a better job of laying out a better vision for this. What is the impact of this? I also think the models that are laid out for most in vocational ministry in the church are terrible models to be a thriving human, or to be, quite frankly, a passionate Christ follower. Like you just, those things are compromised by the models that are being offered to pastors and the expectations that are being placed on pastors. So you've got to work against those models. We've got to reset what that is. And then we've got to cast a vision for what could be, and then resource individuals to help them get there, because the amount of financial equity, as well as capital, as well as the time that it takes to get into that role, at the end of the day, when the shelf life on that is so short, it seems like it's just not worth it. And the toll that it takes makes it so that once I get there, why would I stay in that? And if those are the experiences that I've had to the people in front of me, that's not something that I even have a taste for.
I saw a term yesterday that I'm shook still. It's called pastoral poverty, which
Mm,
is not a new. It's not a new thing. New
sure.
term, I think, to describe a thing that's been a thing for a minute.
Yep.
We've got to fix that,
Yeah.
right? So if we're gonna pay a public school teacher 40 grand a year, in New Jersey, for example, you can't live on that. We're
Yep.
gonna pay a youth pastor, 35 in New
Yep.
Jersey, right?
Yeah.
Can't live on that. So
Absolutely.
pastoral poverty. Any thoughts around that, Nate? What
Yeah.
can be done here? Do we just pour more money in it? Does that
Well,
fix it?
I think again, it's the expectations. If I'm being called to pastoral vocational ministry, then am I being called to poverty, right? Am I being called to just accept this as normal? And so I think again, there's limited resources, and we can talk all the way through why that is the way that it is. But I think again, it's the expectations that people have, that if you're going to be in vocational ministry, then by definition, you can't get rich. You can't have resources. Now, we also know the corruption on the other side. And so I think there's
Sure,
also a whiplash effect,
sure.
right? Where it's like we're going to throw the pendulum too far in the direction of a vow of poverty type conversation because of the excess and really the disgusting things that we see in the extreme. But I also think that there's a sense in which, well, I'm supposed to be poor. And if I have too nice of a house, and I just was speaking to a guy the other day that, he's being criticized. He's got too nice of a house. And yet really all he did was he found a house within the neighborhood that he wanted to move into, and had to kind of stretch to get there, but wanted a resource that he could use to have good hospitality and those kind of things. But he's taken some hits from his own people because the house is a little too nice in comparison to some of the others within the church. And again, there's extremes in one direction or the other, but the expectations, and then the sense that somehow this is what I'm supposed to accept
Mm,
and normalize. We say it all the time, but I'll never cease to be amazed by how much dysfunction people will normalize when it
mm.
comes to their own life, and when it comes to the expectations that are placed on them, and what becomes normative in the context that they find themselves.
Well, first, let me apologize for asking the pastor why pastors should make more money. I put you in a terrible position there. The reality is, guys like me and Wayne need to be casting the vision, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah,
Friends of those pastors
sure.
can say, friends, we need to do better. We need to make sure that our pastor isn't. I'd rather my pastor praying about my kids and my family than, Lord, I need a transmission. Now, I'm not saying that the struggle isn't part of ministry. I think the Lord is going to do what he's going to do. Also, I'd like us to do a better job of paying our pastors a reasonable wage to make sure that they can live well and
Trent,
do the job.
you just gave an anecdote, and I think it's more crucial to the larger conversation. And that is, it's a distraction that diminishes the ministry of the pastor when there are constant financial tensions
Yeah.
and or the need for him to then have a hybrid role or to become a tent maker because he has other things that he needs to do to be able to make a living and to take care of his family. And so for pastors to be able to thrive in ministry, they can't constantly be under the pressure of having to figure out how they're going to just take care of their livelihood, when the reality is they need to be able to be involved in caring for, loving on, and casting vision for the church rather than just trying to survive financially. So I think we're going to see more individuals step into those roles, more high caliber people step into those roles, and having them thrive in that capacity if we're able to reconcile some of those financial stressors.
Hmm. That's good stuff. Good stuff. Big world problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not just first world. That's first world, second world, third world problems.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It
Absolutely.
probably looks different in parts of the world than it does here. And again, I need to acknowledge that. Again, if you're a pastor in China right now, their challenges are different than our challenges here in America. That said, is that we are where we are.
Yeah.
We need to work this out. You just said something earlier, like your children, not even a little bit interested. In my mind, that's probably where we got a lot of our pastors in the past. Was I'm a pastor's kid, and now I want to step into that. And that there's going to be less and less of that if we don't remedy this challenge. I'm glad we've emerged that challenge. Let's segue into brighter future. If we've got limited time left here, like what is exciting for you to be able to continue to make just a massive dent in the universe, Nate? Let's talk a little bit about what's next.
So have had the opportunity to launch what we're identifying as called Actuator Leadership Group, and
Actuator Leadership Group.
And the actuator is that, I'm not a mechanic guy, so I'm going to butcher this, but it's the part of a car that takes combustibility and turns it into movement. It takes potential and it turns it into production.
It takes an explosion and makes the car move.
Absolutely. And if you've got a broken actuator, it doesn't matter how many horsepower or how powerful the car, it's not going anywhere. And what I watch with leaders over the last 20 years is that you've got a lot of leaders that are high caliber leaders that have a lot of potential, that get going in the right direction, but there are so many things that conspire to take them out. Some of that is of their own making, right? Whether it be unmanaged core fears, unrestrained appetites, certain vices that they develop to cope with the stressors of the role that they're in, or other kinds of expectations that are placed on them, adversity that they're confronted with, and getting to the point where they just no longer believe they can win the room or move the needle in the things that they're doing. And so I want the opportunity to go further and further in the direction of coaching and counseling with missional leaders that can help them navigate the complexities, the inevitable complexities that come with leadership, and help them stay in the game, but ultimately to thrive in the game, right? To navigate those spaces. The transition of leadership is so incredibly destructive to any organization, especially when it's an unnecessary transition, when it's coming in a season of toxicity, or if it's coming in a situation where there's been really something broken or messed up. And so to navigate those spaces, to be able to give stability to the organization, but also stability to the individual and their own emotional, psychological, spiritual world. We saw this with COVID. I got to a place in July of 2020, probably the one of the watershed moments of my life, where I had 13 pastors, ministry leaders, and or missionaries that I was working closely with that all wanted out. They just wanted out. And they were done. And there's a number of reasons for that. And some of it I fully understood. But what I had the privilege of doing at that time was to covenant with each one of them to say, we need you to stay in this until fall of 21. We need you to stay in this for another year, because even if you are depleted to 50%, half of you is going to be better than all of the next person. This organization, this ministry that you're leading needs your presence to walk them through this next year. And so I watched that happen, and all 13 of them stayed in it for another year. And then a couple of them by fall did transition out eventually. But it was able to sustain them through that season. And I saw what that could offer to the organization and the exponential impact that that had in bringing stability and walking with leaders in that season where they just wanted to be done and they just didn't think they had anything left, but to empower them and to really walk closely with them during that time. And so to this moment in my life, I have seen the impact of leadership development. I've seen the impact of coaching and counseling with leaders and seeing them be able to rise to the challenge, to reach those moments of I can't keep going, or I don't know how to do this anymore. You step into those spaces and you have opportunity to see them begin to get their footing again. And then the ripple effect of that, as they get their footing, as they gain confidence, as they regain their equilibrium, what that does exponentially for their organization, for their ministry, and then beyond is something that it's almost unquantifiable. And I don't mean by hyperbolic, but I do. I think that there's a ripple effect of that we can't fully quantify this side of eternity. And the privilege of walking that out and doing that in a greater capacity, both individually and collectively, in this region, getting to do some of that at a national level, and then working with a number of different partnerships in Guatemala and Mexico and Uganda and in other developing countries to come alongside of leaders in those environments, to encourage them, to equip them, to do soul care with them, and ultimately to help them gain a greater vision for what they're capable of and where God fits into this part of their journey to sustain them through those incredible challenges and equip them to be able to keep going and have greater and greater impact long term.
I'm sure Wayne's got some questions here. I'm super curious. I hear you saying that you're going to work with, you said missional leaders.
Yes, sir.
And by the way, as a coach during COVID, it wasn't just ministry. Almost every company I was working with, they all wanted to quit too. That was a hard summer, dude. Now these people wanted to quit and they had money.
Sure.
If we don't have money, and keep in mind, if people aren't going to church, are they tithing? I mean, it was, I would say, compounded the scenario that you're
yes, sir.
working through. That said, you're able to retain 100%, which is remarkable. Going forward, okay, we're through COVID, please, Lord, forever, right? And nothing like that happens again in our lifetime. That said, is the challenge is still hard, really hard. And you're coming alongside pastors, missionaries, other people connected to ministry, etc., and being able to extend their life, not just because they didn't quit, but actually because they might even find some rejuvenation, some rest, some answers. Like if they've got this gaping wound, we're not just saying, hey, just keep soldiering on there, champ. We actually might stitch them up and give them some medicine. Absolutely. Is that the role going forward, Nate?
Yeah, great question. I think, as it's been said well by Henry Nouwen, we're all wounded healers, right? So we're all walking around with our own shots that we've taken. But as you just articulated, is it that I'm just a wounded healer that's bleeding out everywhere? Or am I able to step back, to recalibrate, to regain some level of a sense of stability and security? Can I regain my confidence that I can still move the needle? And whether that is through a sabbatical, whether that is just a season of separation, or that is just personal intensive care for a time while they continue to walk through the process with their leadership team and then ultimately the organization. To me, it's stepping into those spaces. And sometimes it's really caring for them in crisis. Other times it's they just reach a point where they're hitting their head against the wall. They don't know how to move the needle now. They don't know where to go from here. And so it's coaching them through those seasons. Trent, this is what you do in so many situations where it's helping leaders actually impact at a greater level because you help them ask better questions, right? You help them understand what is it that they're really driving at? What is it that they're really skilled at doing? And how do they then focus their attention there rather than being a generalist? Maybe they need to be a specialist. Maybe there was a season where they had a different focus and now there's a different role or a different responsibility that they need to take on, and they need to hire others to step into some of those other spaces. You've got so many different expectations, and so often we fly so close to the flame that we cannot see our own blind spots. We are unaware of the things that are really getting in the way, and we got to have somebody that can help give perspective to that, give us a vantage point, and not just allow our own perceptions to drive our reality, but the perspective that we can gain through third-party support and or
Mhm.
just slowing down, turning down the white noise and recalibrating to then have a perspective that allows me to re-engage and have far greater impact in the things that I'm being called into.
You know, the old adage is the squeaky wheel gets the grease. The pastors I observe are not squeaking. They're not making the sound. In fact, they might even feel bad about needing help.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm
Mhm.
supposed to help people, and therefore I don't feel like I
Yeah.
can ask for help. The work that you're doing here, Nate, and I'm hearing both. Hey, when it's crisis, we can come in and we can sew up that gunshot wound, but also preventative.
Yeah.
Hey, what if we keep you out of the knife fight? What if we keep, what if we
Absolutely.
get you before this problem
Yeah.
gets big? What if we kill
Absolutely.
Godzilla while it's a baby?
Yep.
Preventative, but also getting in there once they are really. And listen, if we have listeners that aren't even necessarily faith-based religious at all, helping those who are helping at the grass level, grassroots
Absolutely.
in communities, not just in America, but around the world,
Absolutely.
helping the helpers. Very
Mhm.
special work what you're doing here, Nate. And I'm hoping by the end of this, we give people a chance to be able to support that, who don't necessarily feel called to do it, but feel super, super
Mm.
called to support it.
Yeah.
Thoughts on both?
I think there's, as you identified, there's a sense in which so many leaders are unaware of just how wounded they are. The vicarious trauma is a real thing, right? It's that you're the one who's called to stand by the water's edge, and the water laps up on you, and it wicks up your pant leg. You're standing there soaking wet, but you don't have an idea of why I'm carrying this trauma in the first place. And as you identified, leaders don't feel like they have the right to ask for what they really need or want, and oftentimes they're carrying vicarious trauma that they have no idea where it came from. In their mind, they need to be stronger. They just need to have more faith. They just need to be
Yeah.
more mature or more resilient. And so they don't know where to go for help. They don't know how to make sense out of what they're experiencing, and yet they're
Mhm.
fatigued. They're worn down. They have a lack of passion. They've lost their joy. They have a lack of wisdom. They're not sharp. They're dealing with a mental cloud. Some of them feel like they've lost their moral authority to lead out for any number of reasons. They're carrying shame with them because of how they've experienced that. How do we dismantle that? How do we help them recalibrate? And then how do we help them move forward to a greater future for not just them, but also for those that are leading? Because as the leader grows and develops, everybody benefits because the leader serves as both an umbrella and a net, right? They're the ones that are taking the hits and they're absorbing the fire so that everybody can thrive under them. And then they're the net that has to catch everybody when they fall, right? And so you've got both of those roles, and both of them take unique skill sets, but also a unique toll on the individual. And if you can't help them navigate that, understand that, and then work their way through it, eventually it just comes out sideways through a vice, through something that is illicit. And ultimately, then things are even more compromised as a result of not catching it early enough to keep them from coping in a way that became so destructive to them, to their marriage, and to those under their care.
So all of this, and we're not going to pay you much, and don't expect thank you.
Yeah.
No, but if we were just like spin it for a
Sure.
second and say,
Sure.
if
Who
somebody's
signs up for
listening
that?
to sign me up.
Yeah.
Now that said, is the leader that you are and the perspective that you have, you've gleaned from having been in that
In the
role.
fire.
You've
Yeah.
you've you've walked, you've been forged in the crucible of adversity for all these years, 27, 30 years of ministry. What would you say to somebody who's considering this and saying, you know what, actually, all jokes aside, sign me up. I want to make a dent for the kingdom. I want to make a difference in people's lives, and I don't need a platform for that. I don't need a special. I don't need 20 million followers. I just want to make a difference. What would you say to that person considering it?
I'll give you the formal and then I'll give you the informal answer. Here's my formal
Yeah.
answer to that. Formal answer is there's 5 specific things necessary for people to grow and change and optimize who they're created to be. Knowledge that there's a problem and what it is that is necessary for change to happen, the motivation to do it, the skill set that it can only come through relationship and walking with other people, the support system of other people cheering me on as I do it, and then the hope that change is possible.
Mhm.
Those are the 5 things at the core that are absolutely necessary for growth. And my belief is that the local church is the only organization that God has created in all of humanity and all of history that has the ability to offer those 5 things. And the local church, when it's thriving and when it's doing its job, those 5 things are present, and people will grow and change and become who they are created to be. And then they will fulfill their calling. And then there's exponential impact on the world as a result of that happening. So that to me is the formal answer. And I believe that when pastors step into a church and help that church thrive, and those 5 things become just normative and healthy and vibrant in a local church, you'll see the greatest impact in our communities and around the nation, and ultimately in the world. And so I want individuals that are willing to sign up and say, I want to be a part of that. I want to be a part of plan A, because there is no plan B. I want to be a part of stepping into that missional environment in a strategic, deliberate way, and helping churches figure that out and thrive. That would be my formal answer, and it's something that I've preached for a long, long time. I think the informal answer is the return on investment is worth it. It's just worth it. There is something about stepping into local churches and caring for people and creating a grace-based environment,
Yeah.
and ultimately helping people see what's possible and to have a greater understanding of what could be, and reshaping how people understand who our God is and what that is. And that we just have so many that have a misguided view of God. It's been said well by authors that I respect that, if you don't believe in God, tell me the kind of God that you don't believe in, because I probably don't believe in him either. The point is that we have so many people who have a misunderstanding of what religion, what faith, what the Christian faith is, that if we can create healthy environments, grace-based environments that can allow people to experience God in a fresh and a new way, the return on investment is worth it. There is nothing else that has the kind of impact that a local church, when it's thriving, can have on individuals, on families, on marriages, on communities, and on the world. And so I would invite people to step into that, and then let's find the right support system around you to help keep you in it, help you thrive, and help you deconstruct some of the models that are going to be thrown at you that are going to conspire to take you out. How do we help you overcome those things?
We talk a lot here about accelerated wealth. You're describing accelerated eternal wealth,
Yes, sir.
brother, because a lot of that return you just described is this side of eternity. Also, I would say on the other side, you want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant.
Yes, sir.
Invest your life into something that really matters. And I see you not only doing that up until now, going forward, I think your biggest impact, Nate, is still in front of you. And not only are you going to extend the lifespan of some leaders that are doing that, I think we're going to attract more to be able to join that great fight as well.
Appreciate that.
If people wanted to support this, Nate, where do they go? How do they connect with you, generically or specifically, to be able to either support you with prayer, support you with dollars to make this thing work?
Obviously we can put the content attached to this video and to this podcast, but I would say you can look up the actuatorgroup.com. That's going to be the website that we'll be launching on this one. You're going to have my contact information there. If it is an area where you need support personally, or it's something that you would be interested in a conversation about what we're doing, what we're trying to accomplish, both at a regional and national level, but even from my heart, even beyond that, into the international context, where you've got so many individuals who just need the support to care for individuals that are native to those countries and that have the relational capital to have the greatest impact in those environments. That's what we're getting to step into. I've got 3 international trips planned in the next 2 months to step into 3 different contexts, to bring resources, to equip, to do soul care. Would love to have people join us in that. Working with other coaches and counselors will be the idea, is to put them in a position where they can have the opportunity to step into those spaces, maybe for a short time, maybe longer, but to be able to really develop a network of care for leaders to help them navigate stuff. And I would love the conversation, and would welcome people to reach out in any way that makes sense to be able to continue this dialogue.
Nate, I want to thank you. And Wayne, I want to apologize to you for taking over the podcast here, because there's been some of these where I talk once in 45 minutes, and Nate, this conversation is so robust, and for me, just moving and noble and beautiful, the work that you're doing. And again, the work that you're about to step into. The word convergence comes to mind for you. All of this experience for this moment, for such a time as this, brother, I think the best is truly ahead for you. And with that, I will turn things over and stop dominating Wayne Wagner's podcast to Mr. Wagner.
Sure. Dude, this is great. It's great to be able to sit back and see two brilliant guys just sharpening one another. It's great. It's enjoyable on this end. So thank you, Nate, for being here. Thank you, Trent, for co-hosting as always. Nate, final question we always ask is, what does Envision More mean to you? So I think that I'll throw that question out there to you just flat.
For me, Envision More means I've had to take what God has been doing in my heart and my life over the last 25 to 30 years and ask the question, what's next? Envision More to me is always a willingness to say, what's next? Where do I go from here? And how do I harness what has been experienced and what I've been able to ascertain for greatest impact in the future? And so Envision More is really the catalyst behind why this transition has happened, and why I'm stepping into this in the future, is trying to take what has been I've been blessed with, the favor that I've been given, and the people that have invested in me, and harness and leverage that for the greatest possible impact over the next 20, 25 years. I believe that multi-generational wealth is something that should be taken seriously. And I believe that multi-generational impact is most fully realized through the local church, and to equip leaders and to help them thrive in the local church and parachurch and NGO type environments has the potential to bring about the greatest possible good, to put the biggest dent that we possibly can in the destructive things that we see in our world. And ultimately for me, Envision More is empowering me to take a courageous step that I've been trying to figure out for a long time, and envision what can be in the future as we move in this direction to loving, care for, and support and empower leaders that are missionally oriented in our context and globally.
Good stuff. Thank you very much for being here, Nate. Thank you, Trent, again. And thank you for our listeners. Thank you for being here for another episode of Envision More. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Envision More podcast with Wayne Wagner Jr. of Visionary Wealth Management. We hope you were encouraged and inspired by the conversation today. If you want to dig deeper into the show notes or Wayne's work at Visionary, you can find us at envisionmore.com. That's Envision with a Z. Advisory services are provided through Wealth Plan Investment Management. Wealth Plan Investment Management and Visionary Wealth Management are separate entities. The content is developed from sources believed to be providing accurate information. The information in this material is not intended as tax or legal advice. Please consult legal or tax professionals for specific information regarding your individual situation. The opinions and material provided are for general information and should not be considered a solicitation for the purchase or sale of any security. Thanks for listening.